Ladies and gentlemen, meet my daughter. The only woman in the city who went to university to learn how to change diapers for losers. My father's laughter was like shattered glass, sharp, expensive, and completely heartless. He stood at the head of the mahogany table, swirling a glass of 30-year-old scotch that cost more than my first car. He wasn't just introducing me to his board of directors, he was gutting me for sport. She calls it rehabilitation management. I call it a janitor for the soul. A total waste of my last name. The 12 men around him chuckled, their eyes sliding over me with a mixture of pity and boredom. They saw a girl in a sensible blazer. They saw a disappointment. What they didn't see was the tablet tucked under my arm, or the fact that I'd spent the last 6 months as the state's lead fiscal investigator. They thought I was here to beg for a seat at their table. They didn't know I was there to flip it over. 7 years ago, the air in my father's library felt thin, suffocating under the weight of leather-bound books he never read. I held my acceptance letter to the Department of Health's residency program like it was a holy relic. He didn't even look at the seal. He just watched the flames in the hearth, his face a mask of aristocratic boredom. "You want to spend your life in the gutters of the opioid crisis?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You want to scrub the filth off people who chose to fail?" Before I could answer, he snatched the paper. He didn't tear it, he simply let it slide into the embers. "I build skylines, Elena. I don't waste time on human wreckage." He told me that if I walked out, I'd be walking into a grave of my own making. No tuition. No trust fund. No name. I left that night with nothing but a backpack and a burning, cold clarity. He thought he'd extinguished my fire. He didn't realize he'd just turned me into the ash that would eventually bury him. That I watched from the shadows as my father's legacy wellness project began to rise. On paper, it was a sanctuary for healing. In reality, it was a hollow shell designed to siphon state subsidies into his offshore accounts. 6 months ago, his $15 million grant application landed on my desk. I saw the inflated costs for therapeutic gardens that were actually private courtyards for his penthouses. I saw the line items for luxury fleet vehicles disguised as patient transport that he had no idea that the janitor he mocked was the same official who had been quietly approving his preliminary paperwork, leading him deeper into the labyrinth. I watched him sign leases he couldn't afford and hire contractors who were nothing more than names on a ledger. He grew bold, blinded by the scent of easy money and his own reflection. He thought the state was a piggy bank and I was a ghost. He didn't realize that every signature he penned was another link in the handcuffs I was forging for him. The boardroom was a cathedral of arrogance, and my father was its high priest. He leaned back, his hands laced behind his head, grinning at the board. "The funding clears at midnight," he declared, his voice thick with unearned victory. "Soon, this city will forget the garbage and remember only my name." I stepped forward, the sharp click of my heels ending the celebration like a gunshot. I didn't wait for an invitation. I sat at the foot of the table and opened my laptop. "The funding isn't clearing, Dad," I said, my voice like a sheet of ice. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Move along, Elena. The grown-ups are talking." I turned the screen toward him. It wasn't a bank transfer, it was a formal notice of asset seizure. I watched the blood drain from his face as I cited the violations. Title 42, Section 1328, 7b. "You called me a janitor," I whispered into the sudden, suffocating silence. "So I did my job. I found the filth in your ledgers, and I'm taking out the trash. Your funding is frozen. Your license is revoked. And the state is currently opening a criminal inquiry into every cent you've touched." The heavy oak doors slammed against the marble with a sound like a falling guillotine. I was halfway to the elevators when I heard his frantic, uneven footfalls. "Elena." The roar was animalistic, stripped of the polished veneer he'd spent 40 years perfecting. He grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. His face wasn't red, it was a bruised purple, his eyes bulging with the shock of a man who had forgotten that gravity applies to him, too. "You think you're clever," he hissed, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and desperation. "You think you can just erase me? I built this city." I looked at his hand on my coat, a cheap, off-the-rack blazer he'd mocked an hour ago, and then I looked him in the eye. I didn't flinch. "You built a monument to your own ego with money meant for the dying," I said, my voice low and lethal. He stepped back, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone, threatening to call the governor, the mayor, anyone who still owed him a favor. He didn't realize the lines were already dead. He was an emperor standing in a field of ashes, still trying to command the wind that I didn't stay to watch the sirens arrive. I didn't need to see the titan of industry being led out in zip ties to know the weight of the fall. As I stepped out of the building, the city air was crisp, smelling of rain and the sudden, sweet absence of his shadow. For the first time in 29 years, the static in my brain, the echoes of his constant, cutting remarks, was replaced by a profound, ringing silence. It wasn't the silence of a victim, it was the silence of a victor. That I got into my car and sat for a moment, watching the blue and red lights reflect in the glass of his skyscraper. He thought he was the sun, and I was just the dirt beneath his feet. He forgot that the dirt is where things grow, and the sun eventually sets. If someone treats you like you're invisible, let them. Ghosts walk through walls. Ghosts see the secrets hidden in the ledgers. And by the time you realize a ghost is in the room, the checkmate has already been called.